And I always appreciated that because there's suffering. It can be really frustrating. There are breakthroughs, and those are exquisite.
Right.
But along the way, there's work to be done.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is not spiritual. It doesn't feel spiritual because it doesn't feel like floating in the clouds all the time. It's not like having you're not like astral traveling all the time. It's like, no, you know what the spiritual work is? It's like looking at my own bullshit.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast. Before we get into it, I wanted to recognize your dedication to taking care of yourself, right? You've taken time out of your day to listen to this, which is a pretty amazing conversation between me and my husband, Kevin, all about spiritual practice, manifestation, how to be true and honest and real with yourself so that you can actually start to live the life of your dreams. But you yourself, the listener, you friend, yes, you actually took time to press play. And I'm wondering if you would also do me a favor and take the time to hit subscribe. I know it sounds a little schlocky, a little salesy, but the more of you subscribe, the more the algorithm starts telling people that my content is worthwhile. And then the more I can bring on better guests, I can make the podcast bigger. I can make it more educational, more useful for you. And that's the dream. That's what we're trying to do here at the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast. So help me help you. And my promise to you, if you save it, if you send it, if you share it, if you make sure you subscribe, is that I'll just make the podcast better and better and better as we go. So tune into today's episode. You're here already. Keep listening to learn how Kevin, my darling husband, had really transformed his life through the power of spirituality, through the power of meditation, and through the power of being present with reality. I hope you like this episode. Let me know in the comments below. Kevin Casey.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're here. A lot of my listeners and students have been wondering who my mate is and how we got to this point and who you are and a little bit of your evolution. I think part of being in relationship with someone who is on this path requires a little bit of lifting from the significant other. And so I'd love it if you were to tell the viewers and listeners who you are, where you came from, and kind of how you got to this point. I know it's a lot to question, right? It's a lot. But why don't you start with where you came from? Where are you from originally?
Well, originally I'm from Chelmsford, Massachusetts. I grew up there. My mom still lives in the same house.
And that's the house your father built, right?
My dad built that house, yeah, along with my grandfather, his father-in-law, and my mom helped out. So it was a family effort.
Nice.
Yeah, they bought the land and they just built the house onto it. And that was the house I grew up on. And
the family homestead.
The family homestead. Yeah. I'm a musician and played music all my life.
What kind of music do you play?
Oh, presently I do more, I think, singer-songwriter type music, but I was in a lot of bands.
When did you start playing music?
I started playing music when I was probably around 12, maybe even a little younger.
Oh, wow.
Guitar. I remember, I think my first guitar was a beat-up acoustic that my mom had gotten me. Maybe not. No, it was an electric. I inherited it from my uncle, my dad's brother, who was a guitar player in a band when he was growing up.
Oh, man.
So my grandmother donated his electric guitar to me, and I didn't really do much with it. I didn't even know how to tune it or anything, but my interest stayed with me over time. So I had this guitar there, and I just couldn't really do much with it except look at it and fantasize about what I might do with it. Later on, I ended up getting my first guitar, my legitimate guitar. I wanted to be like Eddie Van Halen, so there was a guitar made by Grand Prix, which is a brand I've never heard of since, or even at the time. But it had the Eddie Van Halen signature stripes, paint stripes on the guitar. So I wanted that. I got that. Took guitar lessons, and I stuck with it. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
I used to make recordings. I had a little tape recorder, and people do this. I guess they call it lo-fi recording. Record onto one tape recorder, and then I'd play that back, and then I'd record that being played back record onto another tape recorder, and I'd play along in the room so you could make multiple tracks bouncing back and forth with these tape recorders. So I'd make full albums. They weren't really good, and all, but they were fun to make, and I really had it was more like fantasy, like just kind of playing, like pretending I was a legitimate musician at the time. But that's what helped me maintain my interest. So from there, I went and I played in bands. Over time, once I started getting pretty good, I dedicated myself to becoming a decent or really good musician. Kind of got maybe somewhere in between, but yeah, it's just been a lifelong pursuit. So yeah, I write all my own songs, and I've been doing that for a long time. And I love music.
Now, I might be biased. I think you're an excellent musician.
Well, thank you.
But I'm struck by the term you used. You said dedication. And I feel like that dedication has come up in several different ways for you. And one of those ways that I've seen with you is through your spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about your spiritual practice and how it evolved?
Yeah, certainly. We were kind of going over this a little bit earlier this morning, and it had been on my mind just recently, and like trying to determine, like, was there a defining moment? Was there? And I don't think there was. I think it started from when I was really young. I was very interested in very kind of fringe, strange things like paranormal. I was really into Bigfoot when I was like 5 years old. I think I had watched this show called In Search Of that I've shown you with Leonard Nimoy hosted it. Yeah. And so, it was almost like a Ripley's Believe It or Not type show, but they would, showcase different kind of like, paranormal, strange, fringe topics like, Loch Ness Monster, all sorts of things. So that really piqued my interest. And so for a long time, I was very interested in things like that. And I also had some, I think, strange experiences just scattered throughout my life here and there. And so that really opened up another world for me that wasn't, I felt like, what most people were experiencing when I was in high school thereabouts. I was reading a book on the UFO experience by Whitley Strieber, very famous, called Communion, and then he wrote subsequent books, in that vein, and I was very into that. And I think what happened there was, when I would go and buy these books, like I was voracious in terms of my reading of this material. And I would go to the bookstores and, you would find these books in the New Age section, New Age occult section. So while I'm perusing for these UFO books, I'm also encountering all these other books that were interesting to me. They're like I remember seeing Shakti Gawain's book on creative visualization. I thought that was a very interesting subject. I'd never heard of this creative visualization. What does that entail? Yeah. So, but I mean, I kind of kept those things in the back burner. And then I think as I continued on in that direction, I started like kind of reading a little bit more, kind of dipping my toes into it. And I think actually one of the big moments for me was reading The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. Like, I turned on to that. Did you ever read that?
I didn't.
Yeah, it was also the book I read was a companion piece to a PBS miniseries that Bill Moyers hosted, and it was very palatable for me because Joseph Campbell was he was relating Star Wars, like the Star Wars lore to mythology, and like it was because a lot of it was based on mythology. That opened up a lot for me, and it also introduced me to just a whole plethora of different beliefs and different religious systems, things that I just hadn't been exposed to. I grew up like a lot of us, grew up going to church when I was really young. I did not like it. I did not gain any wisdom or anything from it. I just wanted to ride it out and to just show up, and I didn't understand it. I was a little kid. Why would I? Stopped going to church after a while, and so that just So I did not grow up in a religious household. It was kind of play acting as one for a little bit, but we were so. Um, but yeah, so that really, I started over time becoming very interested in, especially like Eastern mysticism and, meditation, getting really involved with that, learning about, like reading the Bhagavad Gita. That was a big moment for me too.
Which translation did you read?
Do you remember? No, I don't remember. We have the book. I think we have like 17 copies.
Yeah, we have a collection of Bhagavad Gitas in our household. It's a little unhinged, I'm not gonna lie, because I collect them and it's really interesting. But yeah, so lots of Bhagavad Gitas, and you don't remember which one you read? Do we have the one that you read?
We do. We have it. Yeah. So we can explore that. But that really, this is something we discussed earlier too, because I was really involved with, reading like New Age material, like just eating that. That was my first exposure to a lot of these different ideas. But over time, I realized that it wasn't very practical. A lot of it was very almost too woo.
Okay.
Or vata, to use our
Vata. Yeah.
Well,
can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah.
Like, do you have an example of something that stands out?
Well, I just over time I get the sense. Well, first of all, I wasn't seeing any real world results, like trying whatever different, like exercises or thought processes that they would provide. I remember reading one, which is still kind of crazy to me, but I tried everything because I was just curious. So I have no regrets, and I also don't mean to disparage anybody interested in New Age material, and I still find value in it. But for me, I was doing this one exercise. I remember it was this spinning exercise. It was this book like Transmissions from the Pleiades or something. It was like, just way out there stuff. And it was, you can like evolve by spinning around 20 times, and then like stopping and then, I don't know, just intoning some kind of tantrum. Like I tried it. All I got was dizzy. And, and I realized over time, I was like, this isn't really having any useful effect in my life, or not much. I mean, it seems like escapism. It had that kind of vibe to it. And then I had to kind of like think about that. And
was that the opposite of the direction you were trying to go?
Well, why am I doing this?
Yeah, I'm trying to escape.
Well,
were you?
In some ways, I probably was. Yeah, and especially in my early 20s, I think. Well, I was very curious about just all these different ideas that I had not been exposed to before, and this encompasses everything, like music, the arts, like all these new things were coming into my existence, and I was really just eating it up. And but over time, it did occur to me that this was having no real world effects that I could measure. A lot of things that I was exploring, it's like, okay, it's all well and good. I did realize that like over time, this was not having any significant or any real practical effect in my life. So I had to like wonder, what am I doing here? Like it's kind of, that's why I say like kind of escapist or kind of almost like fantasy based, because it was like just looking into something that I was never going to be able to obtain, or I couldn't. It was out of my reach. So that was a little frustrating.
Do you feel like that was because you're a householder and not an ascetic? Like you weren't about to go off to a cave somewhere and give up all your possession?
No, I did. consider that. I did think about that. Well, again, there was that kind of almost this, yeah, well,
I didn't know. I don't know about this. This is new breaking stuff.
breaking news. No, I mean, I don't know how serious I was. I was very curious about it. And I did, especially when I started getting into Eastern philosophy, and I was very intrigued by that. It really resonated with me. However, when I started branching out into that direction, I was provided with some tools to actually make some changes in my life to further myself on the spiritual path, like meditation being one of them. Like that made sense to me after a while. But yeah, some new age ideas I'm very interested in. I think they're just part of a larger picture, not the entire picture.
Right.
And I think, and I do, I see this with many people. It's like, well, okay, I dip my toes into this. I present myself as being, very like namaste, and I'm into pyramid power, whatever. Especially in the 70s, right? We grew up in that, so there's pyramid power, there's crystals, and there's all this stuff that you can, all these toys that come along with it, and it's, and again, I'm not saying it doesn't work for people,
right?
But it just wasn't the total picture for me. And these things, after a while, I was more suspicious of than anything else. So starting to meditate and then realizing that, wow, interesting, the spiritual path isn't all namaste and flowers and floating through the clouds and tiptoeing through the tulips and everything's great all the time. Because that's not what life is. It's just the way life is constituted. We do live in an environment like this plane of existence that there are opposing forces at play. We have like positive, negative effects. We've got things happening. So I needed more. So getting involved in meditating and then reading Ram Dass. That was very significant, his introduction into my life. I would always see his book, Be Here Now, that his famous tome, and I would look at pictures of him on these different books, and it's, who is this madman with a big beard and the crazy balding head, and the robes and the candles? It's like, which, interestingly enough, while I was into exploring New Age, I stayed away from him because I thought he was too much. So coming back around to him and then reading, like learning about his history as, being his first role in life, Dr. Richard Alpert, exploring psychedelics with Timothy Leary at Harvard, and then just seeing his journey. But there was some woo aspects to that.
Of course.
But it was very weighted. It was grounded. He goes to India, he's taking a scientific approach to spirituality at first. So he meets Maharaji, the Neem Karoli Baba, and gives him acid. There's that famous story. And I love this story. Ram Dass would tell it all the time, and I was there for it every single time. He gives him a bunch of acid, and he's actually worried that this old man is going to have a very, very awful time with this. And as it happened, he just was like, "Oh, it feels like meditating or something," and he just like then goes off and does his thing. And then Ram Dass again later on says, "No, it must have been some sleight of hand."
Right, he mustn't have taken it. I need to
right. So he said, but this was in Ram Dass's mind. So then when he sees Maharaji again, he gives him some more acid, and then Maharaji actually looks at him and goes,
that's right as well.
And then Ram Dass is thinking, how did you know about that? And then along with that too, he realized that something much bigger than himself was at play. Maharaji knew about his mother.
It's a famous story.
Yeah. His mom, I don't know if she had already passed.
She hadn't, and it was recent, and she had liver cancer, and Maharaji knew.
Or did you say spleen? Is that what?
Or spleen? It was a spleen cancer. I forget what it was, but Maharaji knew exactly what organ was affected, and it kind of broke who was Richard Alpert at the time. He wasn't Ram Dass yet. And it kind of broke him. He broke down in tears because he realized that there was so much more than he thought was real.
Yeah.
That he didn't know. And he had to be okay with that not knowing.
That's right.
The kind of the beginning of the destruction of the ego.
Yeah. So a little bit of that backstory with him, for those who don't know, at the time when he and Timothy Leary were ousted from Harvard for conducting their LSD experiments. So from there, he and Timothy Leary were exploring the LSD's connection to like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. They were really, intrigued. So Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert at the time, went to Asia, right? He just explored. He was trying to find all these great teachers and saying, all right, like, well, I'm going to give them acid and see how it treats them. And some of them, they were clearly charlatans. So that was important to me because I was appreciative of his discernment of not just being like, oh, this guy's wearing robes, so he must know what he's talking about, or he has the look. So, but he was using the scientific method, I think, still, which is fantastic because so when he finally had that mind-blowing moment with Maharaji after, meeting up with different gurus and swamis and people who maybe were on the level or maybe weren't, but then he has this experience and it just shatters his entire world. And from there, he went on to become Ram Dass. And I recommend anybody to go and listen to his, go to YouTube.
Yeah.
Just listen to him. It's fantastic. And but what I'm getting at here is that everything Ram Dass was telling me was things that I could apply to my own life, and also acknowledging how much we have to work on with ourselves or within ourselves. Like especially reading like a lot of Eastern philosophy, you realize that this isn't easy. That's, I think, the one thing about New Age that threw me off a little bit, because it wasn't really acknowledging a lot of the suffering or the issues that we have just kind of embedded in us, coming into this world, or how do I like get on in this world? How can I become more spiritual without becoming like more, spiritual, like with all the the crystals and everything.
How can you become more spiritual and still live in this world with it?
Yes.
Material items and interactions. You still have to eat. You still have to earn a living. You still have to go to the grocery store and still have to deal with traffic. Like there's part of the New Age movement, which is, I think, what you're alluding to, that's just like, just subtract yourself from all that. Like just la la la, dance through the fields. Don't worry about anything. You'll deal with it when, we don't know, never, maybe, I don't know. But Ram Dass is very much trying to, on the regular basis, give you the applicable tools to digest the life we're trying to live.
Yes. And through Ram Dass, I was introduced to Chogyam Trungpa, the Buddhist who wrote Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. That book was really impactful for me too, because it was along the same lines. It was like, I think his famous quote is that the spiritual path is one insult after another. And I can see that. I think anything that's worth it requires some challenges, some obstacles to overcome. And we see that in every aspect of life. So that was my trajectory, basically. And then I was very happy to know that you also were an avid Ram Dass reader and listener. And yeah, that made me another reason why I felt at home with you. Yeah.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, though.
All right.
All right. So let's backtrack a little bit. So
yes.
All right. So you're reading books, you're getting introduced to Ram Dass, you're starting to understand a little bit of the nuts and bolts of meditation practice, and then you became an avid meditator for a long time.
Yes.
And then you also practiced yoga?
Yoga came a little further down the path after meditation. I was always interested in yoga, but I think I didn't have a proper understanding of what it was.
Mm.
Uh, at the time, or I think early on, I looked at it as just some kind of thing that maybe was primarily geared towards women, and that wasn't for me.
Oh, the irony.
Well, yeah, yeah. And then that, it's just like some gentle stretching and stuff, maybe with like kind of a little bit of a spiritual component to it, but just almost like dressing, And uh, but over time, I guess when in my studies, really discovered how integral, and how serious it is. And when I yeah, I think everybody remembers their first practice, and I remember kick my ass at the time. I think everybody goes through this, especially maybe guys too, because I think a lot of like men look at this and like, look, I grew up playing football and hockey. It's like, yeah, yeah, with yoga, yeah, and it's like, okay, yeah, I can do a forward bend, So then it's like you go and do it, and it kicks your ass. Mm-hmm. And it looks easy because the practitioners or the ones teaching it have done it for a long time, and they make it look easy, but it's not. So that was very intriguing to me. When I started practicing, I had an aha moment early on that really affected me and really just it bolstered my interest in yoga. I said bolster. That's a problem.
You made a yoga too.
Unintentional. So when you're practicing, like to me, it's the spiritual component is the largest, and I think a lot of it is because when you were in these postures, you have to be present to get your body to form into these different poses, and some of them more difficult than others. And if you lose concentration, then you might fall over a little bit, or you're just it's a practice, right? So that was really important. I started developing a home practice, and that, oh man, I love that. I love it. Just like getting on the mat, no matter what happens before the practice, when you're on the other side of your practice, you feel good, like, or better, like, or more resourceful, better equipped to deal with whatever you were dealing with prior to that. At least for me.
Right.
So to me, it's very much a spiritual, it's a meditation. It's just, but now I'm using the body. Like, instead of just, I'm not just sitting there, I'm actually moving. So I had to kind of redefine what I thought yoga was, or it was redefined for me, because I looked at it more like a physical, like anything else, because I grew up playing sports. I grew up in all this thing. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is athletic.
It's another type of sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is. It's a great job. It's depending on what you do, I guess. But that was yoga came after meditation. I was meditating for I think several years prior to really diving into yoga.
And at one point, weren't you getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to meditate?
Yeah, there were times where I was doing that. I actually one time my friend Adam and I, we got up at 4 a.m. and we went to Carlisle State Park, which is a beautiful forest, and we meditated with the sunrise out in the middle of the woods. And that was a defining moment in my life. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, there were times I was getting up around 3 a.m. to meditate. I was also having a lot of crazy experiences, like along with that. I think that just comes with the territory. And to me, these were just signifiers that I was on my path, that it was kind of like looking into the abyss a little bit, and it was looking back at me.
So what was your driving force? What was causing you to seek out these things? Like, I know part of it was that you just ended up in the weird section of the library, but then and that you're just innately attracted to the strange and unusual.
Yes.
But but I am hearing that there was more behind it. Sort of, you keep saying your journey and then staring into the abyss.
Yeah.
It's like we're seeking something.
Yeah, it was. I think part of it had to do with just strange experiences I was having when I was growing up that I couldn't explain, or that the material world had no answer for. Mm. And I was getting little glimpses here and there, like the aforementioned Search Up show. Like that was giving me another peek into different reality or possibilities. So that was a driving force, I think, for me. I was definitely looking for answers, and I was very attracted to this. I was like right away. I hastened to make any compare or to say this was like from a past life or something that I just carried over into this one. But sometimes I wonder because it's just like, how did I get? Yeah, like how did this happen? Like,
what drew you in? Yeah,
yeah,
it sounds like it was like a key finding a lot.
Yeah, right. It wasn't like my parents weren't like hippies by any stretch of the word, or I wasn't really.
They didn't attest to the fact that my parents are not hippies.
They did not introduce me to any of this, and it was just all on my own. But I think also I even when I was fairly young, I was thinking about death. I was thinking about what happens when we die. Does anything happen? I was very intrigued by that, like really early on. It was really, and I also think I was back to Joseph Campbell, but when I was very young, I saw Star Wars, and that was mythology being presented to me in a very clear way that I'm not sure many films do now, or in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so. I was also, I think, just growing up in the 70s, there was an occult revival going on. Like pretty much from when we were born and all through the 70s, there was it was interesting too. If I think about it, my trajectory, it was almost similar to like the way the 60s transformed into the 70s, where you had flower power, hippie movement, right? So you had all these people like, like let's Woodstock and everything, great. But there was like the dark side to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like wolves at the henna are circling it, like there's people or with it. So then we come into the 70s. We have Vietnam still raging. Nixon, it's a very kind of dark time. Cold War, I think, still raging, right? So then in times like that, there's throughout history ripe times for an occult revival.
Yeah.
So, and there it was. So you look at a lot of shows and movies that we grew up watching. We talk about this all the time. Oh, he still watch them and but it was very like occult, spiritual, new age based. New age came into full power around then, I think, in the 70s. So growing up in that, like in the formative years, being very young, wow, talk about being impressionable and soaking all this in, whether I was conscious of that or not, it was just happening. So that's really like, we just grew up in this world. Yeah. Like, it would have been interesting if, say, we grew up in the 80s, just even the 80s, where it was more like yuppie culture, very much more aligned with materialism, money, the Reagan era, like all this stuff. And you see that in culture, you see it in the arts too. Like, a lot of action movies, like,
like blowing out.
I mean, you didn't have
achieve.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. Like Wall Street mentality, like just cocaine. Okay. All of these things that were just like, it went in that other direction. So maybe if we had really grown up in that era, which we did in a way, but like not when we were little, that things might have been different. I don't know. But that's that I from very early on, and I'm the only one in my family, as far as I know. My dad was kind of interested in this stuff. He used to love watching the X-Files. But but that's just, I used to talk about UFOs and things like that with him occasionally. But I was not getting this from my family. And
or your friends, really?
No, not my friends until
not like the neighborhood kids.
No, definitely not. So I grew up in a neighborhood with jocks, a family of 6 kids that were like sports from morning till night. Like even probably when they were sleeping, they were playing like hockey or something in their
just super rough and tumble.
Yeah. Which in hindsight, I am glad for that experience, because my inclination probably would have been to just hang out and read and play with toys and stuff, and not really engage so much in that sector of life. So I wasn't getting any of this from anybody, really. Like, except maybe just from like the world around me, the culture, in my own kind of strange experiences that were kind of scattered throughout my life, like early on when I was young.
Right.
That made me want to explore. Yeah.
So then we ended up where you were pretty deep into meditation. You had a good yoga practice going, but you were still sorting things out.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I think I hadn't really faced my level of commitment to it. And I think, back to New Age, I think New Age is kind of safe, or things that are like kind of akin to that. It's kind of safe because you can dip your toes and you can read the books and you can have whatever the book is, however rich it is, you just have it. I'm reading this. I'm on my spiritual journey and it's safe, but you don't have to ultimately, there's not much work you have to do. Actually, a lot of the work's being done for you, it seems. I just need to just hang on to this crystal for a little bit, or somebody's going to send transmissions to me and make me better, and make me like an enlightened being, some kind of avatar. So you can kind of just, you don't have to do too much. So eventually I really had to take a hard look. Even when I started getting further into my spiritual practice, it was still held at arm's length. I hadn't fully immersed it. I was very interested in it, but more from
Like a tourist
a tourist perspective, or like the way an academic will read about something.
Drive by, but you don't want to live there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not engaging in this. I like to read about these things, but do I really want to throw myself into this? I started really deepening my practice over time. This has been ongoing. This has been my entire adult life, and I've gone through many phases. So I tried different things, but there's work that needs to be put into it. And a lot of it, you know what? I hesitate to use the word sexy, but for lack of a better word, sometimes we make these things into kind of sexy pursuits, right?
Totally.
Like, isn't this what do you do? Well, I'm very interested in, like Hinduism or this or that. You could,
right. There's the mystique.
Yeah, the mystique.
There's mystique behind it. And people think, oh, that's you must be very deep.
Yeah.
You must be very, you're very mysterious. So kind of hilarious.
My favorite teachers were the ones that actually, their spiritual lives were one insult after another, and they conveyed as much to the reader or the listener. And I always appreciated that, because there's suffering. It can be really frustrating. There are breakthroughs, and those are exquisite. Yeah. But along the way, there's work to be done. Yeah. And a lot of that is not spiritual. It doesn't feel spiritual, because it doesn't feel like floating in the clouds all this time. It's not like having you're not like astral traveling all the time. It's like, no, you know what the spiritual work is? It's like looking at my own bullshit.
Chop wood, carry water.
Yes. Yes. It's the work. It's being committed, dedicated to really observe your own thoughts and actions. Just sort through that. To look at, the way you treat other people, or your impressions of the world around you. How is that helping you? How's that serving you? And a lot of it's ugly. It's like going into a dark room that had only ever been viewed through a flashlight. Yeah. And then finding the light switch and turning it on, and then you see it, but it's like there's so much in this room. It's
cobwebs. There's a book.
It's overwhelming. It's like
stuff. You say, I have bullshit.
I have way more work to do than I really ever thought. I don't like this.
It's over and over and over, and over and over and over again, right? Like every time you think you're involved, something happens.
Yeah.
You go home and have Christmas meal with your family. And it's like, God.
Yeah. I mean, this is a common saying. I think Ram Dass says, but everybody says it. It's like, you want to take measure of where you are in your spiritual practice. Go to a family event. Yeah. Go see your family for a while.
Go see your family. You think you're involved? Go spend a week with your parents.
Yeah. and that really resonated with me, and that as being true. Like, how even if you don't like it, even if it's not appealing, sometimes you
well, there's all sorts of stuff we don't like that's true.
And that sucks too, because damn, I wish this wasn't true. But
often want, and I don't know if you've run into this, we want things to fit into like neat packages where all the little ends are tucked in and the bow is tied so perfectly and the corners are straight and everything's just so.
yeah,
And it is so rarely like that. And it's so frustrating.
it is frustrating. Having you as my mate, which is absolutely amazing. Well, we work on our practice together daily.
We do.
Yeah.
Because we both hold, and it's something that comes from Ram Dass, is the best thing I can do for you is to work on myself.
Yes. Yeah.
And he has the same thing in him. And so that's been a big part of both of our practices. And I think part of why, even though we're kind of digressing into something else, but it doesn't matter, that part of our success in our relationship is that we're constantly open to looking at our bullshit by ourselves and together.
Yes. Yes. Very, very.
We're no blame, no shame, only education and opportunity. We're always interested in really being there in an open, honest way with the other person, so that there is that space and freedom for us to show up however we're going to show up. And it's not always smooth, folks, because I'm kind of a bitch, and sometimes I get very snippy, and he will attest to that. So if you had it in your mind that I'm just this lovely person, get it out of your head. but it's that idea that it's not pretty all the time, and it's not sexy all the time, and people want it to be, and they want it to be smooth, and sometimes it is, sometimes it's glorious, and you can totally interject here, but what I think we both benefit from and love so much is that we're both so dedicated to doing the work.
Yes.
We'll street each other on.
We do, and that's essential. I was thinking back to how my spiritual practice assisted me in life was when my father passed. And
that was 10 years ago?
That was 2011.
2011. Oh, gosh. So it's
2012.
So 13 years ago.
Yeah. So it's been a while. My father passed suddenly. And so it was a shock to the system. And
it was also around Christmas.
Yeah.
So all that along.
Yeah.
So it wasn't,
well,
couched in a lot of other things.
So I it was the first time I really had to, break out that toolbox and see, let's see if I can put this in practice here. And it kicked in almost immediately. I was at work when my mom had called me. She left me a voicemail and I called her and I found out. So clearly I was shocked and really upset. But one of my first thoughts was, okay, what can I do for my mom here? And then also, but primarily just like, okay, this is a natural part of life, and it happens to every one of us, and it's a sure thing. And I just started, breathing exercises came to my attention, just started engaging in those, and also it informed the way I spoke to my mom when I arrived at our house. Because my dad died in bed, so like just hours prior, she was dealing with that. So I was trying to be a calming influence, but also, like, well, again, here's another distinction. Like, because when you get in the nuts and bolts of real gritty spiritual practice, I think that assists you better in things like this in life. Right. Whereas, like, if I was just pulling from New Age, what am I going to do? Like, I wouldn't have. It would have been really superficial stuff, like, like, hold on, Mom, let me just dangle this, like, I don't know, like something like that. But this was like, okay, what can I do here? And like, just and just actually just talking about the nature of existence. Like, so I'm sorting this through in my head with, like, as I'm talking to my mom about it, like, it's okay. This is terrible. This is awful. We like, of course. But I was able to maintain a certain measure of calm that I'm not sure I would have otherwise. Maybe I would have. I don't know. And then later, it came into play again when I was having a real difficult time. I got sick like a couple of days later, like I'm not sure if it was the flu or something. It was pretty bad. When my dad passed, he had been in the grips of something similar.
Right.
So now it's in my mind, like, well, of course, all these thoughts come into my mind, the dark thoughts. Um, what is the universe doing to me right now? And my dad just died. Now I'm sick. I was already having a difficult time dealing with these things, but in hindsight, of course, I got sick because I was weak.
Less stress.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, so I'm feeling all of this stress. So I get sick. So and then of course I'm almost lashing out at the universe. Why me? My dad just died. Now I'm sick. He died and he was sick. So am I going to follow suit here? Those were the thoughts. I remember just being awake in bed, feeling miserable. And so that didn't last too long. I went and listened to an audio recording of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That got me straight pretty quick because it put me in that mindset. It's I think because especially in Western culture, the way we approach death, the way we deal with it, I'm not sure it's very healthy for a lot of us. It's we grieve for ourselves. We have we deny death in so many ways, and so that really helped me. That in a big way, and even at my dad's funeral, just seeing him in an open casket and just sitting there and looking at him and feeling pretty confident that that's not my father right now.
Mm-hmm.
That was the suit he had been wearing in this realm of existence. That's not my dad. I could have, though, just looked at that and been mortified. Dad, wake up or something, and my grandmother came and sat next to me, and I was in a pretty somewhat of like a Zen-like state, I think, at that moment. And my grandmother just came and sat next to me. And I think because I was feeling that way, I was able to alleviate some of her grief in that moment. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm sure somebody listening might say, dude, you were just like in shock.
I feel like you're...
No.
No, I was going to say, you
I don't.
have a really good beat on.
Yeah. No, but these things I was able to utilize. So I see the merit, the utility in a spiritual practice, because I think for so many people, when you just even saying the spiritual practice is loaded when you hear that, right? It's like, oh, woo, whatever. Some people look at it like that, but not everybody. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. I know that was a deep defining moment in your life as far as figuring out how to take care of yourself using the toolbox that you had accumulated over time.
Yeah.
The rubber was meeting the road and you needed to do something. And I find it really interesting that you had practiced enough, and that's why we do practice, is so that when these events occur, it's second nature.
Yes, it's second nature. And yeah, it's like training, right? It's like you train in something enough. You train so that it becomes second nature.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I do feel like, without that, it would have really been difficult. I also, when I really started engaging in my spiritual practice, I was also having pretty bad anxiety at that time in my life. At the time, I didn't even know what anxiety was. My definition of being anxious was that kind of nervous feeling you get when you're about to give an oral report in school.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just feeling a little, And I was going through something that was devastating, going through having these episodes, feeling like I was dying or I was dead, and just all that goes along with that. My practice came into play then as well. And so there's that distinction too, because when we say spiritual practice, it's ongoing. It's something that it never ends.
Never.
Whereas when I first started dipping my toes into this, and I think this can relate to what I was saying earlier about kind of being dissatisfied with New Age, because to me, in some like other things I was getting involved with, I was thinking like the end game was like enlightenment. I want to be enlightened, and I want to learn all these spiritual tricks in like I want to be able to astral travel. I want things better. I want to be enlightened. In that my reading, everything was about that too. It was like to achieve enlightenment. Like, what is this enlightenment? Am I enlightened? I don't even, that word's not in my vocabulary. Like enlightenment. I realize this is a long journey, and that it's just about being present in practice, and it's just this. It's being committed to it.
Yeah, it's one of those infinite games.
Yes. And then also there are pitfalls along the road, right? They're like bright shiny objects that can distract you from your journey. Like, what do they call it? Is it the cities?
Oh yeah, the cities.
Cities.
The powers, the magic powers that you get when you get further along in your journey, like
Yes.
levitation or bilocation or transmorgification.
Yeah.
If you read autobiography of a yogi, there's a lot of descriptions of different saints that ended up with siddhis, and Paramhansa is going and well, he was Paramhansa then, but he was going to visit all these saints to kind of learn, and that's my favorite description of the siddhis, is
Yes.
really like in a allegorical story form.
Well, but that was another benchmark in my life. There was autobiography of a yogi. I've read that maybe 2 or 3 times.
And if you haven't read it, you need to read it. End of story.
Yeah, Paramahansa Yogananda. But some of the stories, it comes up to us in our culture as allegorical. But reading this book, I was looking in the sense like this was just everyday life.
That's what happened.
For example, I remember reading like when he was young, he just there's like a swamp. He's going by and a tiger chews his arm off or something, and he goes and just picks it up and just yeah. He's like, okay, or that, like in the neighborhood. His teacher was a Sri Yukatswar. Yeah. It's like he just like shows up in his room one day and he's like, hey, having a conversation. And he finds out that like he had actually been in Europe at the time or something. It's just like whatever, as a
casual bilocation between friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are those things, but the cities. So there's these the shiny objects along the way.
Yeah.
It's like those are rungs on a ladder, but it's like you can get trapped. You can get trapped in these things, and that was happening with me at times. I was having some pretty unexplainable and appealing experiences meditating at times, and wow, I'm getting better at this. Like I want this more.
I'm great at meditating.
Yeah. Now, as you go along in the practice, that's something you never ever. Although we just talk about this a lot. A lot of people who begin meditation practice often say, I'm not good at it.
Say I'm terrible at meditating.
I'm terrible at this, so I'm done.
You can't be terrible at meditating.
No, you can't.
You just can't be. It doesn't work like that.
No. And I always, whenever I hear that, I just implore people to just stick with it.
Yeah.
You'll see. This is like with anything, though, right?
Totally.
You have to stick with things.
Totally. So I think it would be interesting for our viewers, listeners, our audience to hear how this sounds a little egotistical on my point, but your journey to get to me.
Yes. So it's been a truly magical experience. There's a lot of magic in life. Having covered the nuts and bolts, the grounded truth of spirituality is not to discount the idea of magical things happening.
And so just to kind of bring it into a more understandable sense, when we're talking about magic, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about, and it's actually a very measurable thing, the vibrations and energies of the universe, which sounds woo, but it's not. They actually measure it all the time. But it's those vibrations and energies, and it's very much quantum physics. Like I think quantum physics is the scientific exploration and explanation.
Yeah, well, very true. And however, using the scientific method is only like
it only touches the surface.
Yeah.
There's then the unexplainable things that happen.
Right.
We're not taking a bus off the deep end here, folks. Except that we are. But okay, so the magical journey to get to our relationship.
Yes, that was a very good way to put the magical thinking and being, because it's not like stage magic. There's something else to it.
You had a hard time in relationship.
Very much.
Mhm.
Yeah, very much so. A lot of it was being stuck, my own bullshit.
That's true.
Well, that's what it always comes down to.
Wait.
Really, it's the way we perceive the world, the way all these things. Yeah, I was having some difficulty. I felt like the relationships that I had been in weren't the right ones. I felt like I had to work too hard within them because I felt like it was a little too one-sided as far as the interest level went.
You were interested in
I was more interested in them than they were in me. Or sometimes it'd be the opposite. And I'd be like, I'm not that interested in you. And I was
just not that into you.
Yeah, exactly. So I just kept finding myself in those situations where it's like, I'm either more into them than they are into me, or they're more into me than I am into them.
So there lacked the equality of interest.
Very much so. And then also, or it would be like I would find myself interested in somebody who was not interested in me at all.
You didn't even know you existed.
Or they knew I existed, but they didn't care. They thought, you're a really nice guy.
You're being a good friend.
I love being friends with you. Yeah, like screw the friend zone, man. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I said all that bullshit I went through to end up where I am now, in hindsight, I would do it again and again and again.
Aww.
Yeah. Because I eventually, through some gentle prodding from some friends, said, you should try online dating. I resisted that, and I did it, but a little half-heartedly prior to that. But they turned me on to the Tinder app, which was appealing to me because it was the simplicity.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have to do much.
No, it takes your Facebook profile and makes your Tinder profile from that. You don't even have to make a profile.
And one of my friends had met her husband on Tinder. And she said, this is it's not just a hookup app for everybody. This is actually turning into something else. So, and I had another friend say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also he, at the same time, gave me some really good advice because I was also feeling insecure. I was also thinking, man, I'm not pulling in a lot of money right now.
Mm.
And this would be, I think it's a kind of an exercise in futility for me to go forward with the dating.
Right, because even if you did find a girl to date, you don't have any way to take them out or...
Right, it truly would be an embarrassing situation as far as the way I was perceiving it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of disabused me of that. My friend Foley, our friend Phil, he said, look, man, he's like, I've been going on all sorts of these dates and sometimes you just meet for coffee. He's like, nobody that I've been dating has been really hung up on how much money I make. Mm-hmm. And then I, of course, that made sense to me when I thought about it because I'm like, well, first of all, do I want somebody that is focused on that?
Yeah, that's so materialistic.
Yeah, I don't want. Yes. So exactly. So if I find myself like, if somebody, if they want me to take them out to some fancy restaurant on first date, and I can't do that, then maybe that's doing me a favor because then I don't have to go any further with that. So, and then it occurred to me, like for some reason I hadn't thought about it before, but there are all types of different people out there who don't emphasize the same things. So I started doing the Tinder and I went on a couple of dates. I got a couple of hits. First one didn't work.
Don't mention any names.
No, I'm not going to mention any names, but you know who you are. Well, the first one was one of those situations where the person did not look remotely like their profile picture. Like I think that's a fairly common. Yeah. And I remember just thinking, I remember watching her approach me and thinking like, who is this person? Like, I don't know who this is. So that didn't really, I didn't like that. The next one I dated, there was more promise there. It was more promising. So we had a good first date. She had told me that her father was a musician. I said, oh, wow, interesting. Okay. And she actually showed some interest in me, which at the time I was, oh my God, that's amazing. But we had a real good first date. And then we went out a couple of times after that. But I did start noticing the interest level, like, it started to wane on her.
Like on her end?
On her end,
Okay.
yes. It felt that way anyway. And I was I had to, if I, in hindsight, my interest level wasn't really there a lot, but I wanted to see if I could make it work.
Right. Do you think your interest in being in relationship was greater than your interest in her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Also, this was like one of my, I just started this online and I was getting some hits, I was meeting up with people at this point. So I was feeling more confident as a result. And I had also done enough work on myself a little bit, I think, prior to that, where I felt confident enough that I could move forward in this direction. Yeah. So I remember there was a moment where I really had the kind of like dark night of the soul in this particular relationship. I think she hadn't gotten back to me, and I'd been texting her. There was just like a break in communication, and I couldn't figure out why. We had a good time on a couple of dates, as at least I thought so. I think she did too. And I remember being really bummed out by that. And just, but something clicked within me, and here's the spiritual practice again. Rather than feeling like a victim, or you're like, oh, well, of course this is the way it's going to be, right? Why am I entitled to good things? Like happy to be happy in life. Nobody wants to, like, because that's sort of creeping around. Of course, that always comes first, because that's like first in line, like that voice. When you ring that cowbell for dinner, like it's there right away, So you have to just like push that aside. But I remember going for a really long walk and then thinking that I need to like do a lot of self-examination here. Okay, what am I trying to create in my life? What am I trying to manifest here? So I always think, okay, I want a really loving, healthy relationship. But the way I think about that is I think about her. This other, like what she's going to be like. But if I'm insecure, so in other words, I have to do work here on myself to ready the vessel for this type of relationship.
Yes.
Right. And it's, I think I would have thought that I would have known that already, like that, because I had been doing work on myself. But again, like we have blind spots, and I started looking at it differently and thinking like, okay, I need to just change the way I view this. I need to change the way I look at myself in a relationship. How am I supposed to receive a healthy, loving relationship, or be on the receiving end of it, if I'm still being insecure or feeling insecure about something or exhibiting negative behaviors? So I went for a really long walk, like miles. And the interesting, this will get to the magic here, because I went for I was living in Somerville, Mass at the time, and I walked along the bike path into Cambridge and then into Arlington. This was my whole journey, just thinking about all this, kind of reframing this, so readying myself for a really healthy relationship. As it happened, the particular relationship that did not end up working out. She had told me, like earlier in the week, at one point, she had said, yeah, let's get together this Sunday. I said, great, let's do that. But I also have a camping trip coming up. So I want to make sure I get home on that Sunday so I can be ready for this date, So I end up going camping, and it's a whole other story with the camping trip. But I ended up not getting home as early as I would have liked to. And also there was no cell phone service where we were, so I couldn't call her. So I remember when driving home, or being in the passenger seat when my friend was driving, and just when we got cell phone service, looking at my phone, expecting all these texts like, hey, are we getting together today? Not zero.
Crickets.
So I had a kind of shitty experience, like at the end of the tail end of that camping trip. And then now.
So not in a great mood.
But yeah.
And then she's not interested, I think.
Right. So I reached out to her. No response at all. So I said, here we go again. I'm feeling ghosted here. And not a good feeling. And which was, I'm not like, I don't think I'm really egotistical, but I think a lot of times, though, I do try to give a pretty fair self-assessment. And it baffled me at times, because I thought, I'm a good-natured person. I'm fairly handsome. I'm a good person. Jersey Shore reference. She loves that show. I've never seen it.
He's not a jerk.
So yeah. So I was, it was just frustrating because I'm not like a terrible guy, like why is this so difficult? All right. So then I had to do some more thinking. So I was feeling pretty low about it. And I was actually like, I had that Tinder app up and I was ready to just delete that thing. Goodbye. I'm done. I'm going back into my hole and just stay in there. That's it.
Look at my toys.
Yeah, that's it. The rest of you can go it. That's it. So again, though, it occurred to me to maybe just like look at it differently and to maybe not be discouraged. I mean, after all, this was only my second date. I've known people who have been on that app for a year, 2 years, and going through all that. So patience, Padawan. That was my motto at the time. So sure enough, it must have been maybe a day later. I wake up in the morning and I see that I matched with somebody on my phone. And do you know who it was?
Who?
Well, spoiler alert, it was you. So, okay, but even then, I was looking at. I had seen, I looked at it, and even at the time, I woke up and I said, "Yeah, all right, but this is gonna go south quickly, but whatever. We'll see." So, I don't know who reached out first.
Oh, I don't remember.
What doesn't even matter. Let's say I did, just for the sake of conversation.
I think you might have.
I think I might have, yeah.
We matched, and then I think my thing was I'm going to wait to see if you do anything with that.
So and it brought to mind, again, I had that whole thought process I had gone through with the previous woman about having to reframe the way I looked at it and not like just direct all this like agony at myself or like, So I think I reached out to you and I think you responded pretty quickly.
I think I did.
So I said, all right, I think I'll just go for a walk. And then as I was walking, same course that I took when I was having the breakthrough with that previous woman. And I'm walking through on the bike path for Cambridge and you and I are just like going back and forth messaging. And so she's actually seems interested. And I end up at Spy Pond in Arlington. And I remember just sitting at the pond and I'm sitting on this big boulder and you and I are messaging and all of a sudden I start feeling something like a heightened reality. Like I felt like I was like, something's going on here. I feel different. So, and we're going, and then you mentioned that your dad was a musician.
Yeah.
But not only was he a musician, he was into prog rock and really cool music. And I thought, wow, this is a step up from the last one because her dad was a stuffy, like classical musician, which I like, but this is more like, oh, this feels different. And and then at one point, what really got me was you were talking about your father, and then you said something like, yeah, maybe you'll get to meet him, or I hope you get to meet him at some point. And that hit me so wonderfully because you were showing interest and it wasn't just you weren't trying to figure out why it wasn't going to work or just like, okay, I'm just probing this guy so I can get rid of him. You were like, hey, I'm interested enough where that this is a possibility where we might end up like getting in some together in some capacity where I meet your family. So from that point onward, we just were messaging and it felt so right.
Mm-hmm.
That even when we were still messaging, I felt like you were the one. It was the strangest thing.
And we're gonna finish the story of us coming together in your episode.
Oh, teaser.
Before I know. But before we finish this episode, I just for a moment, because we've talked about this before, you've told me about how you felt like you needed to prepare yourself.
Yes.
In some very fundamental ways before you were able to allow, I say me, but it would have been whoever it was, to come in. Can you share just a little bit of what that might have been?
Well, I think that one thing that occurred to me was that I needed to get out of the way of the process. Meaning, sometimes in life we want to force things. Like, so if you have a cake baking in the oven, I'm hungry for it now. So if you go and take it out too soon, it's not ready. You just have to be a little patient, but also trust that the cake is going to bake. Just let it happen. And so I really had to, again, there was some reframing there, but also I think I reached another level of understanding of what this was all about manifesting, bringing something into your life, creating it, or inviting it, selecting something, and then letting it happen. Because you always, in the hindsight, you look back at these things and you can say, oh, well, I'm glad I didn't stay in this particular relationship. I'm glad that I didn't stay at this job because something better came along. But maybe at the time I was thinking like, I have to hold on to this job tooth and nail, because if I lose this job, I'm going to be in a world of shit because there's nothing else out there. So there's thinking through with a lack kind of mentality, right? Like there's not, it's definitely the opposite of abundance. So if I'm trying to attract abundance into my life, then I need to stop thinking about what's lacking in my life. That's what was essential there for me, to trust in the experience, but to also like do my part. Now, everybody knows that story of the guy who keeps praying to God every day,
Give me
for wealth, give me money. And then finally God just answers him and says, go buy goddamn wires tickets. You got to help me out a little bit. You got to do something.
You got to do something.
Yeah. And it's just like that with everything in life. And that actually made me really start having a different relationship with the idea of attracting abundance into your life. Because on the surface, that stuff sounds, talk about new age and woo.
Right.
It's just like, oh, like, well, the way it's framed to like The Secret and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, it's just going to happen. I don't have to do shit. Guess what? You have to do a lot.
You have to do a lot. And it's interesting because now neuroscientists are discovering the mechanism behind manifestation. And so I'll try to link to the discussion Mel Robbins has with one of them in the show notes. But I think it's really interesting because you really do have to take it out of the woo into the reality.
Very much so.
Otherwise, you're just paying it lip service almost. You're like, you're waiting for things to happen because I'm a good person, when it's like in reality.
The other thing I had trouble with too, with like, because sometimes I would scoff at that and I'd say, well, okay, so what I'm hearing is I have to just make my life perfect in every way for this to happen. Like, well, that's not magical. That's just, yeah, that's just like, yeah, if I want that car, well, yeah, look, magic's going to happen. You just have to go get a job and save up for this goddamn thing. And then you'll get, it's like, well, that's not magical. That's just me busting my ass. That's just life. However, but there is but this stuff starts happening and you see it.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
But that's what happened. I had to really look at that and take responsibility.
There it is.
It's that's the big word right there. I had to do my part in the process. I had to pull my weight, and it was an ongoing process. Yeah, but yeah, it worked out, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts before we close off this episode for now? Anything that came up that you want to share?
Well, is this safe for work? We got some really good erotic titles.
No.
No, I'm just kidding.
Kids.
Well,
Just kidding.
this was really enjoyable. Thank you for speaking with me in this capacity.
Well,
I feel honored.
I'm honored you agreed to be on this podcast, and I am hoping this is the beginning of a series of what we're calling Conversations with Kevin. And so stay tuned. In a couple of weeks, we'll have it'll be a different episode number, but we'll have another installment of Conversations with Kevin where we continue the story of how we got together and how Tinder ended up being a cosmic roulette wheel,
Ooh.
as it were. Yeah. So I definitely hope that the conversations will continue.
I will. I think I have good feelings about this.
Well, you do live in the house, so it's easy to pin you down.
Well, it sure is.
Literally. And
Yeah, and I hope our future conversations, we can get pretty weird too.
we can totally get weird.
So stay tuned. This isn't just going to be
This,
Ooh,
well, it's nothing
things
but
there.
normal.
No, we are not normal people.
Normal people, it's true.
We are weirdos.
But yeah, well, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Look,
I love you.
not too sappy.
And so that was our first installment of Conversations with Kevin. I hope you enjoyed it. We had a fabulous time recording it. And again, I'm so grateful that you're here. If you made it all the way to the end of the episode, thank you so much for sticking in there, for really being a part of the How to Take Care of Yourself family. It means a lot to us that you would listen. I hope you've gotten something out of it. And if you did get something out of it, please, please do us a favor. Hit subscribe, hit like, show those algorithms that we're here, that we're good for you when we're good for the world, okay? And if no one's told you yet today, I love you. And I'm convinced of your capacity to continue crafting a life worth living. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.